maybe.
Hello and welcome to South Fork Sea Farmers, Town of East Hampton Oyster Garden. I'm here today. I'm Alexandra Talty, environmental journalist and hobby oyster gardener. And I'm here today with Barley Dunn of the East Hampton Shellfish Hatchery director and one of the founders of South Fork Sea Farmers, Alina Lundry, a gardener with the South Fork Sea Farmers, and David Pichante, a chef and gardener with South Fork Sea Farmers. And we are here today to talk about the East Hampton Oyster Garden program. Barley, as someone who, was very helpful in founding the South Fork Sea Farmers as well as directing the hatchery, can you talk a little bit about the hatchery's work and how, that kind of coordinates with the efforts of local oyster gardeners as well?
Sure, yeah, I mean, that might take up the whole hour, but no, I'll keep it short and sweet. So the hatchery was established back in the 80s in response to the brown tide algae bloom that kind of wiped out all shellfish and seagrass on the east end. Our mission is basically to provide oyster, clam, and scallop seed for town waters as a stock enhancement program. So we've been doing that since the mid-80s. John Aldridge started it back then. We have a hatchery in Montauk in one of the old Navy torpedo testing range buildings. We have a nursery on 3 Mile Harbor, and we do most of our field grow out in Napeague Harbor. And then in 2006, we started a kind of a lecture series where we went through different stages of the hatchery season, biology, the algae culture, how we get shellfish ready to spawn. And then we did a spawning workshop and then talked about diseases, pests, and predators and all that stuff. And then in 2015, during one of our open houses, Dr. Scarlett Magda of Veterinarians International came to the open house, and she asked me she was a little like, why is there no oyster gardening in East Hampton? Because, the Southhold projects and aquaculture training, which Kim Tatro started years ago, was well established. He kind of started oyster gardening on the island. So she was like, I live here and I don't want to drive to Southold to Oyster Garden, so let's get something going on the South Fork. So I said we're totally game for that, but we were never really sure if the public would be interested. So if you think you're interested and there's other people from the public interested, let's get it going. So we talked to the trustees, talked to the town board, and in 2016 our first garden was established in 3 Mile Harbor, right next to our nursery, with about 20 gardeners. And that was full right off the bat, and it kind of just steamrolled from there. So the year after that, we doubled that garden, and we added Hog Creek. Year after that, we added Accabonac. Year after that, we added Napeague. And last year, we added Lake Montauk. So now we have 5 garden sites with about 100 gardeners, and we also have some folks that are growing off their own dock, which is a possibility. So anybody who's listening who has their own dock or bulkhead or waterfront property, underwater rights, as a lot of people do in Lake Montauk, they can actually grow their own shellfish. And South Fork Sea Farmers is part of the South Fork Sea Farmers mission, aside from these education programs, is to try to get folks outside of East Hampton to grow their own oysters off their own property, because East Hampton's covered by us, the Shellfish Hatchery. So we'd like to get some more folks doing it outside.
It's such a great initiative, and I think a nice example as well of kind of how something that is old is new again. I think that in the past 30 years, we've seen a lot of people get more involved in the water in a way that maybe on the East End, people haven't been for the past 150 years. As people who are in the gardening program, can you guys share maybe a little bit about your experience with it? What was it like your first year as an oyster gardener?
Good.
Sure. I have to say I've had a wonderful experience being an oyster gardener. I became interested in doing it actually during the pandemic. The pandemic started and we were in lockdown, and I couldn't get oysters anywhere. And then if I could get oysters, I didn't know how to open them. And I had been to a fundraiser for the South Fork Sea Farmers a few years before at 3 Mile Harbor at the nursery location. And I became, I guess, social media friends with one of the founders. And so I reached out to him and I said, you know what, I'm really interested in this program. And it was really because of my not having oysters for a while. You know, a lot of people during the pandemic started baking bread. And I was like, how can I get my own stash of oysters? And so that first Christmas, I asked my family for, you know, really good shucking knives and things like that. And I immediately, I guess it was January following, I reached out to Barley and said, you know, I need to be involved. I need a cage. I need a location. And it was still available, which was fantastic. And then I have to say, last year, which was my first year, was fantastic. It was a great experience. My oysters are located in Lake Montauk, and it's a little far for me because I live in Springs, but it's been easy, it's been educational. I feel like I'm doing something for the community, and it's fun. It's really fun. So.
So I had started reading about it when it first came out through the Star, because it was in the Star, and I said, you know, I was like, wow, this sounds like something I would like to do. I also have 3 little boys now, very small, ages 4, 3, and 5 months, and I thought, like, you know, living in Montauk, I live in Montauk, and I thought, you know, what a great way to get the kids to appreciate, like, the beauty of where they live. So when they opened up the Napeague spot, that was it for me. I mean, I've grown up in Montauk, so I've fished and clammed and oystered and all around Montauk as a kid. But when I saw Napeague, because I love Napeague, it's just so peaceful and beautiful there. And I was like, that's where I want to farm. So that's what got us into it. And we go down there with the family, and it's a family thing. We do it on the days off that we have in the early morning or at sundown, and usually at low tide. That's the best time to do it, obviously. And we all go down, and it's a family thing. And it's just, not only are you learning about oysters, but there's in Napeague, as I can speak to, the aquaculture and the life there of what goes on throughout the season is just, it's incredible. I've never seen anything like it as far as our local waters, the things I see down there as it grows.
That's actually, yeah, one of my favorite. I mean, I think I got into the program because I, you know, think it's environmentally cool and interesting, and then I love oysters as well. But then actually doing it, I feel like the exposure to all the sea life, and then, you know, seeing, oh, this seaweed is like here this month, but then next month it isn't, you know, you kind of foster that really deep connection with the water, which has been unexpected for me. Do all of you guys have your own gardens, and you also have a commercial operation as well? Could you guys, one of you, just share a little bit about, you know, what over the season, what the process is like for people at home that maybe aren't as familiar?
I'll start with the beginning, and you
Sure.
kind of take it home at the end.
Great.
So in the beginning of the season, when we get our emails from Barley and telling us it's time to go, we all get our stuff together. And if you're a returning grower, you do have stuff that you had sunk for the winter from the year before. So, and that is a certain size, which is exciting because if you love oysters, you get to eat those right after they come up for the winter, and they're awesome at that time. And then when Barley's ready with the spat and the seeds, he'll call us to come in and pick them up, and then we start the process from there, which is usually about June, maybe, right?
Yep.
Give or take about June. And then once they get the spat,
Yeah, once we get our seed, our spat, we take bags that are basically mesh bags, different size holes, and the little ones are basically all in one bag together for a bit until they start to grow, and then we go through a process of every few weeks separating them out, separating the fast growers from the slower growers, and we change them out into bags that have larger mesh holes. And they just continue to grow. We continue to go and clean the bags, clean the cages, so that they're always getting enough water and plenty of nutrients and oxygen in the water. And it's amazing how fast they grow. It's pretty unbelievable. I didn't expect to be able to eat some in the first year, and even though they were tiny, we certainly did. That became we started We started maintaining our oysters more often than probably we needed to. Generally, you're supposed to do it every 3 weeks, but we started doing it weekly because it is fun, and because in the summer you wind up having house guests who also want to participate. You know, they all say, "Can I come can I come on the weekend when you're working on your oysters?" And yeah, it's great. And so when you're out there and you're cleaning the cage and they're growing, you can't help but want to taste them too. And the people that are there helping you, they're tiny, but again, they're very good. And so, yeah, we take that all the way through fall, at which point barley contacts us and they get ready for hibernation. And the cages get dropped down very low to the bottom. Instead of floating, they go down to the floor of the water. And they sit there until, I guess it's March or April when they get pulled back up again.
Be about April. So yeah, the way the oyster biology works is 50 degrees is kind of like that magic temperature. Anything below 50, they stop feeding and kind of go into a state of dormancy, and then 50 degrees plus, they'll kind of wake up and start feeding again. So that usually happens around April, and then they'll start growing, and the fouling organisms start to take off. So that's when you really need to start maintaining them. So it's works out great, and it's like to see these guys here and hear about their stories and just sort of give an idea. Like when they get their seed in the spring, June, you're talking about a volume of, like, sometimes it's they're tiny and it's a film canister that represents, if anybody remembers what a film canister is, like a quarter cup. Say a quarter cup for 1,000 oysters, and then 3 weeks later you come back and then it's like a half gallon, and it just kind of explodes from there. And then by the end, their oysters would almost fill a barrel. They grow that much. I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and it still blows my mind how fast oysters grow. They're really awesome.
I feel like I always, in the beginning of the season with my partner, we're like, okay, because we have our oysters on his grandmother's dock, and we're always like, okay, we're gonna get so many oysters, because we get these like little bags, and you're like, oh, we have so much space, and then by August we're like, oh no,
Yeah,
like
you're out of
we're
space.
trying to like figure out which ones we can put in which cage, and then his family also uses the dock for clamming, like they have their clams off of it. And it's funny, they grow much faster than what you think. And in the beginning of the season, I think I'm always like, I can farm like 3,000 oysters this year. And then all the time scrubbing, especially as they get bigger,
Yes.
the hours get longer as you go.
Some of our folks, because as if you rough them up, they kind of chip off that new growth.
Yeah.
They develop a deep cup. Some of the gardeners actually roll every.
That's what we do.
You guys
We
do.
I
They
do
roll
that
every
too.
Yeah,
single
we
one.
bring a setup
Yeah.
down to the beach
So do we.
and we roll them, because when you get that oyster that's deep and full, I mean, it is not it's amazing. They're so good like
Yeah.
that.
We do the same thing, and the location in Montauk has really nothing there, like some of the other locations, and I had been looking through whatever junk I had in my basement, and I found this old wooden board meant for pizza ovens, and I was like, oh, this will work. Here's a
Perfect.
exactly,
Yeah, perfect.
and so that's always in the trunk, and we just roll them on the
Nice.
wooden pizza board.
Yeah, some of our tabletops at the nursery have been pretty much destroyed by people just gouging these.
Yeah.
I write a note every year, please don't roll on the table, but sure enough, the gel.
Oh,
collects like
everybody
gone.
does.
Yeah.
And I've heard that like bigger farms, they have, you can have like a mechanism that tumbles them. How does that work compared? Like, is the hand rolling better, or?
It's probably more, it's more complete, but it's just time consuming. You wouldn't want to do that on a farm where you have, tens
Yeah.
or even hundreds of thousands of oysters. So the way the commercial folks do it is they use a tumbler. So if you can imagine a cylinder, a long cylinder, it's on a slant, and usually the cylinder has different size holes in it. So you dump your oysters into one end, the cylinder's spinning. So you dump your oysters into one end, and they work their way down. And as they're working their way down, they're tumbling, and that new growth is chipping off. And the holes in the cylinder are size grading them. So there's going to be, the small ones will fall through, the larger ones will retain. So it's a size grading tool and a tumbling tool to chip off new growth to get that deeper cup.
And then would they also be scrubbing them individually, or that would be like
No,
more power
no.
washing, or just?
Yeah, the
Tumbling.
tumbler, a lot of the tumblers have a water jet. Some of them are more like a water sprinkle, but the tumbling helps clean them. And the oysters themselves really shouldn't get that dirty
Yeah.
if they're being maintained.
If
It's
they're
the bag
growing
that
them,
gets dirty.
if they're growing them deeper, is there more or less fouling on the cages? Like when
Good
they're-
question. So on my farm, we grow everything on the bottom. And so you're going to suffer slower growth because, the oysters are filter feeders. There's more food near the surface. So that's why a lot of farms try to grow on the surface, because you get significantly faster growth. But you also get more fouling because a lot of the fouling organisms are filter feeders or they're photosynthetic. So there's more fouling at the surface. So yeah, there's less fouling on the bottom, but slower growth.
Right.
Boring sponge, which is our common sponge, it's that sponge that you'll see in the hinge. Little tiny drill holes that when you go to shuck it, it kind of blows up.
Yep.
That's kind of a little bit more common on the bottom, but it's also common enough at the surface that it's an issue. So the one thing that we do to combat that is you can either, air drying works well. So with the cages that we use, they're based on the oyster grow method or the design, where there's a float, two big floats on one side of the cage. You can actually flip the cage up so that all the oysters are out of the water. So air drying them overnight works well. Or we brine dip them, which is basically a 30% salt solution. So it's, seawater is about 30 parts per thousand, and the brine dip is 10 times that, so it's 30%. So it's a very heavy salt solution, which you dip your oysters in for about 5 minutes, and that does a great job of killing pretty much everything but the oyster. So it helps to combat against the boring sponge and any other fouling organisms.
And
Keeps
that's
them nice
only
and clean.
once or twice
Yeah,
in a
you
season.
really only need to do it once or
Right.
twice a year, for the boring sponge.
These
Yeah.
are great tips, because if you are interested in oyster growing, you'll find out that cleaning the cages, I think people think it's very complicated whenever you tell them you're an oyster gardener. And in fact, the hardest part is the cleaning.
Yeah, it's
Maintenance.
all manual labor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not very scientific.
No.
No, but it's interesting. I must have gone through 15 different types of brushes to get to my favorite brushes, and they're different sizes that
And
fit in
gloves.
different areas. And gloves, I have
Oh, yeah.
several different types of gloves depending upon the water temperature and,
Yeah.
whether it's cold or not. And definitely brushes. It's interesting. You go for
Pressure
everything.
washer is the best thing, really, if
Right.
you can do it, if you can get it.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
at Nat
Or
Peak,
air
you don't
drying.
have that
Yeah.
luxury of like 3 Mile. That's why 3 Mile is great. Like you have everything you need at 3 Mile. It's with
Yeah.
the walk. At Nat Peak, it's very natural, and it's like there's no power washers
Right.
coming down there.
Yeah. But if you're doing it once a week, that's a great way to combat fouling too. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't need to do it that often. 2 weeks is really kind of ideal, but we do it on 3 weeks with the gardening just because everybody's busy, and
Right.
3 weeks is still fine. Every week, if you do it every week, you should have very little fouling to deal with.
Yeah, we didn't do it every week, but we
Sure.
were doing it certainly
Yeah.
every 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Oh.
that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely staying ahead of it. And then
Yeah.
I found, recruiting family members, offering them cold beverages.
Yes.
That always helps too.
We have brought beer in a cooler
Yeah.
down to the water, yes.
Or having
works.
children, they don't even
Yeah.
have choice in
Yeah.
cleaning them.
If you want to eat them, you got to clean them.
But at the same time, I mean, we have some derelict growers that aren't on top of things. And sometimes, some of those oysters that are in these derelict cages, I mean, you'll pull this bag up and it's covered in
Yeah.
colonial tunicates, just covered. You're like, there's no way there's anything alive in here. The oysters in there can be absolutely gorgeous.
Really?
Yeah. So it kind of it doesn't argue for neglecting them, but if you do, something comes up, you still end up with beautiful oysters. I mean, they're just gorgeous. Granted, they definitely need individual cleaning because they also have the tunicates and probably some barnacles on them, but
I saw a few of those cages out there, and I kept thinking, let me offer to Barley if anybody,
Yeah,
I'll go clean them. Can I
Yeah.
help myself to a few?
yeah, that would be a nice bonus.
So, yeah.
So each year, East Hampton Hatchery seeds over 15 million shellfish across the town's waters, which is so impressive. Can you share a little bit about that process and then the percentages of like how that shakes out?
Yeah, so we're in the beginning of it now. So the season starts like basically right after New Year's. We bring our brood stock in, start to condition them, get them ready to spawn. And then we start spawning in mid-February. So we're trying to, just like, land-based nurseries for terrestrial crops are getting a start in their nursery greenhouses, we're doing the same thing in the hatchery. So we're getting a jump start in the season by spawning in February. So right now we have our first crop of oysters going through the hatchery. We spawn them on February 15th, and they're going to probably start setting over the weekend or the beginning of next week. So they have a two-week larval cycle, and then they set. And once they set, they cement themselves to a substrate, and then they start to spread out and then start to really look like baby oysters. So we'll do, generally 3 oyster spawns, and at each spawn, at spawn day, we'll end up with literally hundreds of millions of larvae. And then we cull those down to about 10 million before setting, just based on the space that we have. And then from say a set of 10 million, we'll get maybe 5 million oysters, because that metamorphosis from larvae to setting is very stressful, and will actually, that's really the only stage where we see mortality. So 10 million drops to 5 million, and then we'll have a pretty solid 5 million oysters per crop or per cohort. And then throughout the rest of the year, we're constantly size grading and trying to maintain. Our ultimate number for oysters is about 3 million. So we're constantly culling off and giving some to the gardeners and just seeding excess. Clams, on the other hand, we have a lot more capability of clams just because they remain smaller. Oysters are the fastest grower of all 3. So that's why we're limited to about 3 million, again, based on space and labor. Clams, we shoot for about 6 to 8 million seed. And by seed, I mean clams that measure about the size of a dime at the end of the first season. And scallops, we'll start doing scallops in about spawning scallops in June. So the clams and the oysters will condition, which means we bring them into the hatchery building and trick them into thinking that it's springtime, and then spawn them in the hatchery. The scallops, we let them condition on their own in the wild, which basically means once springtime comes and the waters warm up, those scallops are getting ready to spawn, and then we'll bring them into the hatchery and spawn them naturally, pretty much around the same time that they would naturally spawn. And we shoot for about 500,000 scallops, just because scallops are much more labor intensive, because they can't handle being out of the water and high and dry like oysters and clams can. So we do much fewer scallops. And so the breakdown is basically about 3 million oysters, give or take, 6 to 8 million clams, and about 500,000 scallops. And then anything over that is basically stuff that we cull out. So we can have some years where we do a grand total of, say, 30 million. But really only the final number of seedable stuff, the larger we can get the shellfish in one season and seed it, the better it's going to survive. So we'll get some oysters up to 2 inches in one season, seed those, and the majority of those will survive. Clams, we shoot for, like I said, about the size of a dime or a nickel in one season, seed those, and only about, it's depressing when you hear the numbers, but only about 20% of those will survive.
Oh, wow.
So we're still talking about millions, and 20% of millions is still pretty good when you're talking about a town like East Hampton. But it's just, that's the way it works. That's why Mother Nature has designed these shellfish to spawn on the order of millions per spawn, because that's just what they're doing in the wild. They're trying to overwhelm Mother Nature and end up with, a few percent that make it to adulthood.
So do you know all the great clamming spots in East Hampton?
Yeah.
You
But
see barley around town.
But it's no secret.
Follow him.
Yeah. I think, yeah.
It does
we
change
do
year
everything
to
during
year,
the day.
though.
It does. And we do produce maps that are available on the website
Okay.
showing exactly where we put everything. So public knowledge, but we try to draw the area a little larger than it actually is, make people look around a little bit. No.
Right.
But yeah, that's the beauty of it, is that the program works, and you can go out and dig up a bucket of clams in half hour, get your oysters, and it's the one of those few permits that you can buy that pays for itself in really no time.
Definitely. And that's actually one thing that is, for people that are interested, it's getting the permits is so easy through the town. I mean, I live in Southampton, but it's always very easy. I think that can be something that maybe intimidates people oftentimes. And I think the shellfish permit, it's free or $10.
I think it's 20 or
Yeah,
20.
20, 25. It was-
Yeah.
Like I said, it'll
Yeah.
pay for
Yeah.
itself
Yeah,
in
for sure.
one outing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it means, and you can go and then also another person with you as well. So
Right, yep.
generally, definitely do that if you're interested. And so one of my favorite parts of oyster gardening, we've all kind of shared stories of like the sea life that we've seen. What are some of the craziest things that you guys have seen in your time on the water? Because that's, I think, a really special part of all of this.
Oh yeah. For me, I tell everyone about it. It's like we went down. It was probably like spring, maybe May, early May or mid May, and we went down. And we were walking down to Nat Peak, me and the kids, and the edge of the water was boiling. And I was like, what is going on? And it was like, the water is boiling. And as I got closer, I saw, when I say thousands, it was thousands of baby blue crabs that had just come out. And they were scampering across the side, getting to the eelgrass, because the eelgrass is obviously growing, a little at a time through the season. So the eelgrass was about this high, so you could see them as they were going across and into the seagrass and into their little holes, because as we got closer, they were moving away from us, right? But, I mean, it was so much that the whole edge of the water looked like it was boiling. It was like, to see so much life like that at one shot, I was just like, wow.
Were your kids impressed?
Yeah, we were, I mean, it was just, we look for them now all the time. We're looking for the holes to see where they are, and see. I hope that I could see it again, but it was one of those things that I felt was like I was really lucky to see like that. It was super cool.
Yeah. I feel like there's a surprise almost every time you're out there working your oysters. I mean, there are times that I've found a couple of huge ones last year. 7 inches was the biggest one that I have, and now I have the shell that sits on my coffee table. And yes, we did eat it. Yes, we did. There was a bunch that were a little bit smaller than that, like 5 and 6 inches, but the biggest one we did eat. We put it on the barbecue though. Nobody wanted to try that one raw. But there's always surprises. It's what kind of sea life pops out of the cage, the shrimp, the, other fish. So, and then if you're doing it early in the morning or late in the evening, there's always other wildlife that is around, So that's a beautiful part about being out here on the East End.
The bait fish in the fall, like the amount, like
Oh,
as you're going
yes.
out to your cage, and literally there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bait fish swimming. You feel them rubbing up against your legs, and the water's so clear. It's just like, wow.
Yeah, I love seeing the blackfish, baby blackfish. They're really cute, but you also know that people love fishing for these things. So the fact that our cages are providing a nursery for them, you see blackfish, black sea bass, all these kind of recreational fish
Yeah.
using the cages as a nursery, and it's like, so you know that they're doing well. Oyster toadfish are one of my favorites. I don't know if you've ever seen them.
Which are the
They're a bottom dwelling, kind of looks like monk, but it's a kind of an ugly little fish,
Yeah.
but they have a lot of personality. They kind of croak a little bit, a huge mouth. Like if you look at videos online, it's one of those fish that just kind of hides in weight, and then it opens his mouth and it just produces this vacuum that sucks fish in, and they're pretty cool. Yeah, they come in all different sizes. You'll get them tiny ones, and then some the size of your foot. Eels too. See those a lot in the cages.
yeah.
Big ones.
So obviously there's some added benefits for oyster gardening, in terms of habitat. I mean, whenever the crabs get into my cage, I feel like I've been giving them like free dinner,
Yeah.
which is fine. They can have 1 or 2 oysters.
Yeah.
But can you just explain a little bit about how the oyster gardening kind of helps, offset the dramatic shellfish decline that we've witnessed on the East End since the 1980s?
Yeah, I mean, the hope with the oyster gardening and all of our oyster, clam, and scallop growing is that those will reproduce and spawn and create wild, what we'd have to call wild stock. And you do see some of that. And there's not a lot of habitat for oysters to set on, because oysters require some sort of hard substrate to set on, whether it's other oysters or rocks. You see them set on bulkheads. So there's not a ton of habitat, but you do see sign of oysters setting. Like every boat ramp that you go to, there's always rocks next to the boat ramp. Look at those rocks, and often you'll see oysters set on them. Clams, there's some natural set areas areas where clams are thriving, where aren't actually seeded. So they're either self-populating and have been for centuries on their own, or they're a product of seedings. And scallops, the same thing. When we seed the scallops, we seed them very densely so that when they spawn, sperm and egg actually meet, and then they'll produce offspring. And we see that every year. Although the adult scallop, and we talked about this during one of the other panels, although the adult scallops are dying off, there's been a huge set of scallop bugs throughout the whole Peconic, from Flanders to Montauk, every year. So that's a result of, any scallops that are making it into the summer and spawning, and all the restoration efforts. It's all part of it. And so one of the things, like Bob, who's one of the South Fork Sea Farmers board members, he's noticed that at his garden in Accabonac, when that garden started, the bottom was really just bare and sand. And ever since the garden's been there, providing, occasionally the oysters do die and those get tossed into the water. That substrate is providing more substrate for seaweeds and other macroalgae. So you're seeing more stuff grow on the bottom just from extra things, shells and other stuff being dropped onto the bottom. So it's helping to provide that habitat.
Definitely. And I know in our last episode, we just talked a lot about the creation of oyster reefs, which is awesome work that's being done on Long Island and in all of New York's waters. And we learned that there's a ton of oysters on, I guess it would be the north side of the canal. And they were saying that they're all setting. And it's like all from the oyster programs.
Right, yeah, and all the farms probably. Yeah.
Yeah, so
that's one of the things we try, farmers will try to tout, is that you're growing all these oysters in close proximity. When they spawn, there's going to be some larval product. It's just a matter of whether or not those oysters find a place to set. That's the crux.
And can you guys share some of the, what has been something surprising about being in the oyster program that you wouldn't have expected?
I think it's more than met my expectations, actually. I guess the people that I've met that have created new friendships, which is really nice. I continue to learn so much. There's so much to learn. And I think new ways of cooking, new appreciation for the water, new appreciation for, not new appreciation, I've always had an appreciation, I think we all do. But you just look at things differently. I can tell you that almost every day now, I pass by the water and I take a look somewhere, whether it's 3 Mile Harbor, whether it's, Maidstone. I don't let a day go by when I'm here on the East End where I don't go take a look at the bay. And that's changed. I very often spent weeks or, months driving by. And now I stop, I look, I actually experience it, which is nice.
Cool.
I think surprise for me is how fast in the last 4 or 5 years it's just become really like more and more people you hear talking about the program, and and just everyone wants to make the water better, obviously, because this is where we live. But as far as just like the interest in it, and like when I tell people that we do it, they're like so like, I want to come, I want to see how it goes, or can I taste some oysters, obviously. But like just it surprised me that 4 years ago it was very few people. Now I feel it's just like the program has really exploded, and I think it's credit to you.
Yeah, a lot of people just don't spend time in the water. They go for swims but just getting your head, whether it's putting a mask or goggles on and sticking your head under there and seeing what's in there, and just spending time in the water doing what you guys are doing, it makes a huge difference. You know, you hear a lot of the kids, they just, unfortunately, some of them just don't spend enough time on or in the water, and we
Yeah.
got to get more of those guys and girls in the water too, for sure.
Appreciate where
Makes
we
a huge
live.
difference.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we're surrounded by it,
Yeah.
literally.
Kind of the only thing we have
Yeah.
around us.
You
Yeah,
know, we did that as children growing up. We all spent a lot, I think, all of us here
Yeah,
have spent
I
a
did.
lot of time at the water. And, you know, it also is very often the case that as you grow older, you don't enjoy it in the same way,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know? And so this is nice. This oyster program kind of brought me back for sure to spending time in the water.
I love that. And so, Farley, if you could just quickly run through the sites in East Hampton and then the Own Growers program so that if people are interested.
Yeah, so we have 3 Mile Harbor, which is right at the end of Gann Road. We have Hog Creek, which is right off Waterhole Road. Accabonock, which is off Girard Drive. Napeague Harbor, which is at the end of Krasen Boulevard. And Lake Montauk. Unfortunately, all of them are pretty much chock full, except for Lake
Okay.
Montauk. So if anybody wants to join, it would have to be in Lake Montauk, which is too bad because it's all the way out east, like Alina said. And then as far as own growers goes, if you have waterfront property with a dock, a bulkhead, or underwater rights that's in certified waters, which we can easily figure it out by looking at a map. You can get what's called a license to collect or possess from the DEC, and any town permits you might need. East Hampton trustees have a permit. I'm not sure if Southampton does. Very easy, free permit to get. And then whether it's in East Hampton Shellfish Hatchery can set you up, or South Fork Sea Farmers actually has a permit to get folks outside of East Hampton growing their own docks.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. And so the regulations with the state are you're limited to 1,000 shellfish or 5 bags. And that's really it. It can be, and that's very easy. Like I said, free permits. We can hook you up with all the gear and all the knowledge
And you have to
So-
be a resident of East Hampton for the East
for
Hampton
the East Hampton
program.
side, yeah.
And
But if you're outside of that, then South Fork Sea Farmers can help
can
you out.
connect you. And then if you don't have your own dock or bulkhead outside of East Hampton, you can also go through Cornell
Yeah.
Cooperative.
Yep, Cornell's.
And they have a
got
site in Tiana Bay.
Tiana, yep.
And I think they're trying to open up a new site as well. So
Are they? I wasn't sure. Yeah.
a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, they definitely are there, and hopefully there'll be more. Yeah.
And then how would you guys say your expectations were going into this? Did you think it was more time, less time?
I think I thought it would be less time, but I made it more time because, yes, now it's a new love. No, it really is. And again, you have a lot of people that are excited about it and want to participate in some way. And so all summer long, I know when I have company, they want to come and help. Or I have friends who ask if their kids can come and help. I have 2 different friends that already have been asking me for this coming season if I could take their daughters out. So that's nice, you know.
I would say that it's definitely a commitment. Like, it is
Yeah.
a passion for sure. You will love it. But it is work, and it is a commitment, and there is a schedule that you should follow. Like he said, you don't necessarily have to, but if you want to have a nice outcome, you want to have, deep oysters, or you want to have clean oysters, or you want to have oysters that are growing fast, disease-free, no crabs in your cages, like we had talked about. It's a commitment. You have to commit to it. And I think for me, I didn't know the extent of that. But you know what? An hour and a half, 2 hours every 3 weeks I don't think that's too much. And sometimes you just need to take a time out and cut everything off, put the cell phone down, and
Yeah.
go in the water. Seriously, just enjoy what you have. And it's work. There's work to it. It's not, but
The other nice thing is you can't really plan the environmental let's say, aspects of your day. You know when you're going to go do your maintenance, right? But then it could be pouring rain.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
we had a situation with a nor'easter, right, last spring. Or
Yep, or the wind,
you know,
or
I had friends in town, and unfortunately, we had to go and do this during a high tide. And a high tide in Lake Montauk in our location gives us literally like 1 foot of space to sit and
on the
work
beach.
on.
Yeah, on
Right.
the beach, yeah.
You know, it's, so it's, you know.
high tide in April is cold.
Right.
Yeah.
Too.
You know, you want to go on a nice low tide day. You walk out, it's up to your knees. You go high tide, it'll be up to here. You better put a wetsuit on. You know.
Yeah,
Exactly.
or very high and warm waders.
Yeah.
I do think, yeah, I've learned a lot more about the kind of natural rhythms. I mean, I spend a lot of time on the water outside of oyster gardening, but this past season, it was a full moon and it was June, and we'd been really nervous about our cages, like through every big winter storm, one of us would check them, but then it was June, and so we were thinking, oh, it's really nice out. You know, we just weren't thinking about it as much. And the lines, because it was like a really high, it was like the neap tide, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
So it was really high and then really low, and our line like cut itself. And then they floated away, and we found them on another beach, and it was like this big
At least you
devastation.
found them. That's good.
Yeah, but we found them too late. We didn't. So they were all. We were hoping that some of them got out. It was very devastating and traumatic, but it was like, okay, now I learned what a spring tide means. It means like big fluctuations in the water, and now I know to check my cages. So I do think those insights are really helpful. Barley, do you have any other information for people at home that may be interested in joining the program, in terms of like websites or?
Yeah, probably easiest to go to South Fork Sea Farmers website, and there's a contact link through there. Go to the Town of East Hampton website and find the aquaculture department, and contact me through there. And just send me an email and I can send out information, application. And it's quick, and there's still time for this year, but like I said, Lake Montauk only, unfortunately.
Well, luckily Montauk is really trendy now, so maybe
Yeah, no,
you
it's
could
beautiful
like
out there. It's just
go
a
for a
drive.
surf,
Yeah, no,
get
it's
your
great.
oysters.
It's right off East Lake, so it's on the east side.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful spot.
It is a
You
great
can't go
place.
wrong in any
I
of the
grew up out
spots.
there, and we would go. When I was young, we would go clamming. We would take canoes out at nighttime, go eeling. I mean, there is significant life out there. It's just,
Oh, yeah.
and where the spot is, you're closer to the inlet, so it's not like you're all the way in the back of the lake.
It's
necessarily.
all the spots are beautiful. You
Yeah.
can't go wrong, really.
One thing I would advise is doing it with a partner or someone is
Yeah,
really helpful,
yeah,
or like a
definitely,
committed
definitely.
family member.
For sure.
Because my first season, I had some friends that we were all supposed to share, and then they kind of dropped out. And it can be a lot if it's one person and it's your first season.
Yeah, I would recommend partnering for sure, because there's plenty of oysters to go around, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you can spread the burden. But like David said, 3 weeks, every few hours, every 3 weeks isn't bad. But if you have more time, you could do it every 2 weeks. And once you figure it out, which most people figure it out during their first season, then you can just go whenever you want. We make the bags available and everything's available, so you can just. A lot of people like to do it on their own,
Yeah.
because they can have the whole place to themselves.
Do you guys have any other tips for first timers or people interested?
I think the partnering is a big thing.
Yeah, that's
definitely.
key. That's
That
pretty
was a
key.
very good point. I partner with a friend's husband. I contacted a friend and said, "Do you mind if I ask your husband?" And then we both started loving it so much that now we both have our own cages, but we help each other. So
Oh,
which is
that's a good
great.
way to do it,
Right, it's
too.
great. So if one of us is out of town,
key.
the other person can go take care of it. So I think that's the biggest thing.
For me, I think it's finding the right brush and gloves.
Yes.
Like, because really that's the most time-consuming part when you're trying to clean the cages. So if you have a good brush and a good pair of gloves, because you will get your hands cut on the oysters when you try to roll them. So
Yeah.
if you can do that, and that helps tremendously. And I like having a spare bag too, like having a clean bag necessarily, so you can take another bag and clean it off later, because that helps with the timing.
What constitutes like a good brush? What do you guys look for?
I have several different barbecue brushes that I think are better than the
metal.
basic, not the metal ones.
Oh,
They
okay.
have them now with the nylon, that red nylon. And they don't scratch the cages in the same way that I've seen other gardeners use the metal ones, and they I like the black cages to remain black and not all scratched up.
Yeah.
But there's also these sponges that have like a soft side on one side and almost like a brillowy side on the bottom. And they don't last very long, but you certainly get a couple of cleanings out of them because they're just, they take everything off very easily. They fit in your hand, they're round. Those work well.
I use a deck brush like they use on the boats, like the really
Yeah.
like low, thick bristle that really stiff, and you just unscrew it from the handle and you use it in your hand and you just scrape it pretty good. It works pretty good. And then you can also get inside to get on the underneath part of the cage. That works pretty good for me.
The other thing I bought last year was a good set of waders.
yeah.
And that was definitely necessary. Most of the time, if the water's a little cooler, I prefer to put on a wetsuit or something like that, but the waders did help.
Yeah, especially if you have your own dock in the winter.
Yeah.
I found.
Yeah.
That's chilly.
And Montauk, and in Lake Montauk, as you're walking out, there's a fairly.
It's rocky.
Yeah, it's a rocky
Yeah.
surface on the bottom. And they're large rocks, and there's a lot of growth, so you can't really see. So you're feeling your way the whole way to the cage. It's a
challenge.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
challenge, but,
I would add also invest in zip ties because I've had
Yes.
it where I get there and then I realize I don't have any, like I left my zip ties at home and then you're like, you want to open it up, but then you don't.
Yeah.
And so you like half open and then,
my best trick from last year was, the 5-gallon paint containers that Lowe's, everywhere has them, right? Home Depot. You can buy a lid for those that is a cushioned seat on Amazon, like, $15 or something like that. And so I throw all of the things I need, my gloves, my brushes, everything inside the bucket. And then I have the cover that's a seat. And so in a place like Lake Montauk, you put it down, you have a seat to work.
oh, I love that.
And it's great.
Yeah.
So it was very simple, and everybody loves it.
Do you have any other, I mean, obviously you've seen so many farmers or gardeners in the first year of their program. Do you have anything else you want to add before we open it up to the audience questions?
Not that I can think of. But just like David's mentioned, the gloves. The gloves are key
Yeah.
because growing oysters are extremely sharp. They'll cut right through the gloves.
Tiny little
They'll cut right through your-
cuts that you don't know until
And
you,
they're-
until you
and they're-
squeeze a lemon,
And
then
they're
you know
bleeders
it's
too.
The chef is,
Right here, I have some right
it's all
now.
over.
And they're bleeders too.
Yeah,
You'll
they
see
are.
it. It's blood's just going everywhere. But they're very sharp. So gloves are key,
Yeah.
no doubt.
and so we have time for some audience questions.
Okay. Hold up.
What else?
All right, everybody. So our first question is, have you noticed any changes in the ecosystem around the oyster gardens?
Well, like I said, the some of the gardens, the bottom has come alive just because of, whether it's shells being dropped or just people adding texture to the bottom by walking around on it, or, just the attraction of other life coming to the cages and dropping to the bottom. So it definitely turns a barren bottom into something with, whether it's seaweeds or macroalgae or other shells. That's definitely happened.
And I'm
in
going
most
into
sites.
the third year on this dock and in Cold Spring Pond, and now we saw a bunch of wild oysters around it,
Ah,
which
nice.
they weren't there before. And it's a great body of water, so it kind of makes sense that, after 2 years of having our oysters there, now we're seeing wild ones.
Cool.
But that was really exciting.
That's great. I think it's too early for me to notice a difference, but I can't say I've been keeping a pile in my yard of oyster shells. I know that you can't necessarily throw them right back in if they're not from our area.
Right.
So I've been keeping a nice big pile that are certainly have been outside for more than 6 months. Or it's growing, and at some point, if we need shells for any kind of reef type system, I'm happy to contribute them.
Yeah, that's something hopefully on the horizon. We'll do some proper oyster shell recycling. but
Yeah.
finding a place to cure them is the crux. 'Cause nobody wants that in their backyard.
Yeah.
No.
A pile of stinky shell, but we'll get there.
I think in Napeag, it's just, every time I go for the last 4 years, there's always something new. Always. So, I mean, does it change? I would say so, or maybe it's just I've constantly just seeing more and more, but it's definitely very healthy in Napeag, that's for sure.
Yeah, nice.
Next audience
Okay.
question.
Are there any differences at the various garden locations where oysters grow better due to advantages in water flow or oxygen levels?
That's
Barley's
all
coming
you,
in.
Josh. That's all you.
We haven't really measured it. I mean, it would be totally, purely anecdotal, but we haven't noticed any major differences. I think if any place is a little slower, it might be Hog Creek, just because there's not quite as much flow there. But it's also kind of counterintuitive. You know, you'd think the high flow areas like 3 Mile Harbor would have greater growth and less fouling, but it doesn't work out that way. Some of the and a site like Hog Creek where there's less flow, you'd think there'd be more fouling. Again, it doesn't work out that way. It's really depends on the location and the flow, obviously, but it's nothing drastic that's really noticeable.
Yeah. Well, we did do the blind tasting, so that is, you know, despite them being relatively close in proximity to where they're growing, there is flavor characteristics that are unique to each setting. So it'll be the terroir of the
Right.
of the ocean. So I mean,
Terroir.
Terroir.
Yeah.
Is that the word?
Yes,
Is it
it is.
terroir?
It is.
That
Yeah,
was-
terroir.
Yeah.
So
And I think Napeag won that by a hair.
Oh, really? I
That's
figured we
interesting.
were going there if you were
I didn't
bringing
want to say.
it
I
up.
wasn't going to say it. I was going to.
See, now, I was thinking that we pulled some of our oysters out of Montauk and placed them in a bag over at 3 Mile Harbor for the winter. And I was wondering if the taste would change or if I could notice a difference. And I didn't really notice a difference.
Yeah.
So,
I do think I mean, they're starting on Shelter Island at Ram's Head. They do like a Merroir tasting where you can like get them at a few different sites, like even further away. But I do think that you can taste the difference more than maybe see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. For variety, you can definitely tell the taste difference. And I would say, out here, they're all very close, but I mean there is a slight difference in what we do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's like, it's not something you're going to see. It might not even be something you can measure, but they do taste different.
Yeah.
We did that
Yeah.
tasting from all the, I think back then it was 4 sites, but
Yeah.
there was a difference.
Next question.
And we'll probably do that
Would
again this
any
year, by the
Oh,
way.
really?
of the oyster
Didn't-
growers be open
in the fall.
to growing other species, such as clams, scallops, or kelp?
Good question. Clams is are really impractical, partly because, well, 2 main reasons. One is that they don't overwinter well. Clams really need to be in the bottom or in some sort of tight containment in order to survive. And they grow so slow that it's literally 3 to 5 years to go from seed to a little neck.
Wow.
So it's quite an endeavor. Scallops is a possibility. We were thinking about doing that. We were talking about doing that with maybe, you know, somebody with 1 or 2 years under their belt, add scallops to the mix. That's a possibility. And kelp is also a possibility, but let's just keep in mind that kelp is a winter crop, and it's really hands-off. I mean, kelp, once kelp is seeded onto its long line, there's really not much to do. There's no maintenance, really. And what happened this year with ice does a lot of damage to kelp. So if we have an icy winter, you basically, it depends on where it is, you might lose the whole crop. But we could potentially get gardeners involved in the kelp process. It's a November to May thing, so it would have to be, you know, folks that are here year round. But there's potential for sure. Scallops would probably be the most likely.
I would do scallops.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most people
I would
I would-
happily.
I mean, you'd get a return on your investment in
Oh.
like really quick on that
I
one.
would.
They were selling for $50 a pound this
Yeah.
this winter.
Yeah, I mean,
$50.
plus you can eat, you can eat them at any size.
Yeah.
So
Right.
if they're the size of a silver dollar by the end of the first season, in-shell scallops, like scallops and spaghetti, pretty tasty.
I would grow kelp too. It'd just be harder to find a partner who wants to be in, in the
Yeah.
water if you have to be in those winter months.
Yeah, we'll have to think outside the box and figure out a way for folks to either do it individually or help us out with
Yeah.
our long line system. Think about that.
Do oyster cages provide habitat for other species that are beneficial?
Absolutely. Yeah, we were speaking about that. So you'll get most common things are grass shrimp, which everybody's going to see. There's those little tiny
Always.
shrimp
Yeah.
that don't
Always.
grow very
Always.
large.
Always. So
Always.
many.
Yeah, tons of them.
They
Tons.
jump right out.
Yeah.
Like to nip at you a little bit,
Yes.
maybe.
Yeah.
Blackfish, black sea bass, cunner, all those little nursery fish. Crabs will hang out in there. Things will hang out in the cage, under the cage. And there's also, the invertebrates, like the tunicates and barnacles and
Right.
stuff like that. Yeah, because otherwise there's really no habitat. There's barren bottom. There's occasional rocks and occasional codium or Sputnik grass. And so as soon as you put something additional in the water, stuff flocks to it. And it's pretty much, it's immediate. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
It's like within days.
Okay. In nature, oysters are stuck together in clumps. Why are the farmed oysters separate?
So the way that we grow oysters in the hatchery, they have, like I said, they have a 2-week larval cycle and then they set to the bottom. We provide little tiny pieces of what we call microculture, which is ground up oyster shell. So each oyster settles on its own little piece of shell. And when it settles, it cements and loses its ability to move or resettle. So once it settles once, it's done. And so that's how you have, single oysters on your raw bar, single oysters growing in your cages as gardeners. So in the wild, like Jason said, you're going to have oysters setting on either rocks or other oysters. And when oysters set on other oysters, that's when you get oyster reefs. And that's how oyster reefs are formed over the thousands or millennia. Oysters setting on oysters, and before you know it, you have a huge oyster reef. Hope that answered the question.
Everybody, we are at the end of our questions from the audience, but I have been asked to say that there are links to South Fork, on the South Fork the South Fork Sea Farmers website, where there's far more information and video clips of cleaning cages, etc. And you can also watch the previous programs of this series. And that's about it.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our sponsors, Channing Daughters. We'll see you next month. Okay, we're done.